Hey everyone, just want to start things off with a quick note that Schorr Manor Studio is back on Kickstarter with a new campaign for my latest spooky novel, Flight of the Phantasmadactyls. It's the latest installment in my Zombiesaurus series, and it's the perfect book to reserve during the holiday season. I mean, it's spooky, it's Christmas, of course, right? So check it out, show some support, maybe even help spread the word. Now, on with the show.
Live from Shore Manor Studios, this is Tales from a Small Town Journalist with Matt Schorr.
Hey guys, thanks for checking out this episode of Tales from a Small Town Journalist, the podcast dedicated to all the weird and wonderful stories you are only going to hear about from reporters working in small communities just like yours. I'm Matt Shore, and I was a small town reporter for almost 10 years before I finally hung up my camera and my notepad. And in that time, I had some unique and interesting experiences working with the public, and I got to know some other reporters who also had some unique and interesting experiences with the public. Before I go any further, I do want to make sure and mention that this is a listener supported podcast supported by wonderful folks just like you. There are a few great ways that you could show some support. One, right now, as I mentioned at the opening, we are on Kickstarter, so feel free to go look us up over there. Maybe even show some financial love for Flight of the Phantasmadactyls. You can also check out our bookstore over at mattshore.net. Got lots of spooky books over there. We also have a t-shirt store, so feel free to check that one out if you so choose. And finally, if you could just help spread the word, that would also be wonderful. Use whatever means you have at your disposal. Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, or just good old fashioned person to person human contact. Find a friend, find a loved one, find some random person on the street, give them a good shake and say, hey, you've got to check out the Tales from a Small Town Journalist podcast and all the weird, weird stories that they have to tell there. This is our annual look back on the news of the year, the year that was. This is becoming a tradition where I welcome Lee Landini Wright, an associate professor of journalism over at Murray State University in Western Kentucky. We've done this a few times. We've looked back. It's always interesting. We kind of went back and forth on whether this year was tamer than others or if we've just gotten used to the chaos. Hard to say, I suppose. But it was a great conversation. It was interesting looking back because, tame or not, there were some pretty big events, both at the national level and the local level, and all of it trickled down and permeated everything. Everything was affected by it. So I won't waste any more time. We'll shift gears, hop over to that conversation, and let's see if we can learn from Lee Landini Wright. Okay, I'm joined once again by Associate Professor Lee Landini Wright. This is our traditional annual look back on the news that was. So much of it, the biggest news of the year, a lot of times it's national, but so many times national trickles down to local and it impacts us there, and often in ways we don't expect. So before I go any further, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me on. This is gotten to be our annual pre-Thanksgiving, pre-Christmas tradition.
Yeah, it's always that's funny because it's one of those time travel paradoxes you have with podcasts since we record in advance. So yeah, for us as we record right now, it's before Thanksgiving, right before. This will probably come out after Thanksgiving, but before Christmas, and yeah, and then it'll be the New Year. So yeah, it's like Doctor Who, a big wibbly wobbly ball of timey wimey.
Right, and you never know with the news cycle what might happen.
Yeah, ironically, looking back, I thought that it's not that nothing happened, but this felt like kind of a tame year, at least compared with previous ones. What would you say to that?
Maybe just we've gotten used to the pace.
Maybe that's it.
It could be it. I mean, I don't know if there's such a thing as tame anymore. The news cycle is, 24/7, 365 and always changing. Um, so I think maybe we just got used to the pace of everything. It's just like there's something new every second of the day. Um, it's hard to keep up some days, honestly.
Yeah, it is. Like I said, it felt tamer to me, but that's not to say that it was, yeah, easy. That's for sure. There was always something out there.
There's always something out there. Of course, I focus more on local level stuff with my classes and my reporting. So, I know we're going to talk about some of the national level stuff, but locally, it's been quite a year in far western Kentucky. On December 10th of 2021, we had the EF4 tornado that just decimated parts of our region. And so that's been a lot of the local coverage, and that has been nonstop because, we had to cover, of course, the disaster, and then we had to cover, all the, the politicians who came in, and now we're into recovery mode on the coverage, but there's something new every day there too, and that affects our local audience here in far western Kentucky, specifically in Mayfield and Marshall counties and
Yeah,
Fulton
it is.
County.
Yeah, and the tornado kind of hit me pretty hard. It's my hometown, Mayfield, Kentucky. That's where I'm born and raised, and I was actually visiting when it hit. So
Oh, goodness.
that one hits home for me a lot. I keep checking in on Mayfield to see how they're doing. I'm hoping to check in with the mayor again sometime soon and see how that recovery is going a full year out.
Yeah. Yeah. My students are working on stories for our capstone website on this exact topic.
Mm. Well, speaking of things happening constantly, one big one that I think did impact us nationally and at the local level was the recent midterm elections. Apparently, a lot of big surprises there. Um, I have my own thoughts, but I'll defer to you first. Like, what was your experience with that, and what was the local fallout for that one?
Well, locally, we had a 37% turnout here in Callaway County, which kind of surprised me in a way, because leading up to the election, there had been more buzz on some of the national races and the state races, but not as much on some of the local races. We had a contested sheriff's race, but we had a lot of, down ballot non-contested races. But we had 37% turnout, which I thought was pretty good. Statewide, it was 50%, which also is pretty good for a non-presidential year. This was the midterms, of course. Um, but I thought that was a good sign that people are still interested in voting and in democracy.
The big story coming out of it was, and of course, it's the sexier one. The polls, they got it wrong. They got it wrong. They always love to say
Right,
that. And whenever they start saying that, my first question is always like, well, did they really? Like, when it comes to polling, one of my trusted sources is still Nate Silver from 538.com. Just because he always, like, they have their model, which I feel like is pretty accurate. It takes everything into account. But on top of that, they also offer their own analysis. And one of the things he kept saying this time was like, I think we might be lagging. Like, what we're showing is possibly the feeling of about 2 or 3 weeks before, but we're just seeing it now. And so,
right.
yeah, consistently, like I remember the one they loved saying the polls were wrong was when the 2016 presidential election, and I just still remember I kept looking at Nate Silver the whole time. He's like, "No, this is actually how it could go." So,
Right.
what were there any surprises as far as like people thought would happen there in your part of the woods that didn't?
No, not really. I think it went pretty much as planned over here. The big race, obviously, was the 42nd district judge race with Jamie Jamison and Andrea Moore. Um, that one ended up, that was also controversial because of all the issues that Jamison's been facing uh, with the Judicial Conduct Commission investigation. Um, so I don't think that was really all that much of a surprise. That was just one that had a lot of interest. Of course, the abortion issue, Amendment 2, statewide, the vote was no. I believe Callaway County in this end of the state was more of a yes vote on that one. But I don't think we had a whole lot of surprises. It was, to me, the election coverage, I took students to the courthouse to cover. What surprised me was it took so long for the returns to come in. And it's one of those things of election night, you never know. Sometimes you think, oh, this is going to be a quick night. As soon as I always tell the kids it's going to be a quick night, that's when it turns out to be a long night. we had, I believe, 6 election centers plus the early voting and the absentee voting. And it just took a little bit of time for all of that to come in. But I was not all that surprised with the races, honestly.
I've been wondering if that's going to become, is that like our new normal now? Because I distinctly remember times when there were always like one or two that were taking longer, but for the most part, everything was wrapped up on election night. Whereas now it's taking so much longer, like days, sometimes even weeks. And
Right.
is that going to continue forward, or I'm just wondering what's going to happen there.
I think that's a good question. It does seem like it takes us a lot longer. One thing that did kind of bother me as a former journalist and also just as a person was, the AP and others tend to call races pretty early in Kentucky when, um, the polls have closed in the eastern part of the state before they close down here. And that's always kind of bothered me because, what if a voter sees, that, the AP is already calling it one way or the other? Could that deter them from voting? So that's always kind of bothered me. They called it pretty early for Rand Paul, and our polls were still open. There were people still in line at one of our polling places at 6 o'clock, which I thought, wow,
I heard about that happening in a lot of places. Here in my home, where I live now in Clarksville, Tennessee, that was happening. Polls were
yeah,
closed. And there were lines out the door.
yeah, I thought that was great. And I don't know if it's because we had smaller, less polling places or if more people voted. I personally did the early voting. I've done that since they started offering it. I absolutely love early voting.
Me too. Yeah, I do that all the
Because
time.
you can go like when you have that time, and as a journalist, if you're in the journalism world, of course, election day is a very busy day. Um, and even as a journalism professor, it's a bit busy day because I was getting ready to take students there. So I appreciated having an opportunity to go on a Friday afternoon when things were calm in my life and I could get into the polling place, do my civic responsibility. And then election day, my Tuesday, Thursdays, I teach typically 3 classes. So it doesn't leave a whole lot of time to run out. One of my classes goes until 4:30, almost 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Um, so I really appreciate early voting. I hope it's something that continues.
I'm a huge fan. It's it's so convenient, so helpful. Yeah, I want it to be expanded and made more available to more people. I think it's yeah.
I think
I'm
so.
an advocate of it.
Yeah, I am too. I really enjoyed it. And, I've talked to a lot of people who did participate in early voting. And the same thing, they were able to go because their work schedule freed up at a certain time. And, it got them to the poll at the time. And I liked it. I really like it.
Yeah, I agree. And it's I see no reason why it should be an issue. Like I fully support really all of them, like absentee voting, mail-in. I'm in favor of all of that. But the criticisms people have, it's like, okay, I can kind of see it. I don't agree with you, but I see it. But with early voting, I don't see why there should be any issue with that. To me, that's just it's you have your poll workers there. It's on what's the word I'm looking for? Public property. I mean, everything about it, like it's just a perfect setup. So yeah. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
but so yeah, like I said, it sounds like you're like me. Everyone, it became the sexy story to say how surprised everyone was, but I w- I'll admit I wasn't completely unshocked. There were things that happened elsewhere in the country that surprised me a bit. My home state of Tennessee did not surprise me at all. It went exactly the way I expected. But yeah, just some of the things that they said. Like I remember one of the big predictions they called it. It was going to be Roe-vember, and that prediction has, I think, proven kind of true.
I think so. I think so. I think especially a lot of women voted. I haven't seen the demographic breakdown yet, but I think a lot of women were concerned, as well as a lot of men who were concerned about this issue.
Mhm.
Um, I think that one drove people to the polls. And of course, I think local races always are a big driver when you have more contested races on the local level.
hmm That makes sense. Yeah. One demographic I heard that really broke out was a Gen Z, which I think that surprised some people, to the point that I think I heard one commentator say, this is now Gen Z's world. he said, he's like, Republicans, you're in trouble. They don't like you. And then he's like, Democrats, for the record, don't feel safe. Once they're done with the Republicans, you're next. So
Yeah, I have a Gen Z son, and I think that's pretty accurate. He has followed a lot of the races. He's been following, he doesn't really follow politics that much, but he does. He says he doesn't, but he does, if that makes any sense.
mm,
But I definitely see a lot of my students are following politics. They're very interested in what's happening. They're very socially aware, and they're very socially active as well. I mean, these are not the kids who are, they care. They really do. And I think they're going to be the ones who drive some changes for us.
yeah, it's going to be the next decade or so is going to be interesting.
Yeah. And I don't think they subscribe to the, vote the party either.
No, which is good. I would love to get back to that. I think we're way too hyper polarized right now.
Right,
So
right.
yeah,
I wish we would just, speaking of polarization, I wish that we would start to have more authentic conversations about these issues, where we're not doing red blue. We are just talking, because I think when you get out and you actually start talking to people, we find out that we're more alike than we're not alike.
hmm
And we may have some different views on issues, but at the end of the day, we can still talk about them in a civil manner instead of yelling at each other like what we're seeing on TV.
yeah.
Um,
Except at Thanksgiving dinner, it never works
well,
there. Yeah,
there is that. There is that. But I think a lot of times, like, voters, we are more similar in our beliefs than different.
I agree. I think really we're all different shades of purple
Right.
rather than
Right.
yeah,
I think that's pretty accurate.
yeah. Because I certainly don't go. I very definitely lean a certain direction, but I only lean it. I'm not just completely all in. There are
Right.
exceptions everywhere. Yep.
Right. And then on like local races, we had one, the sheriff's race, um, and Republican and Democrat. To me, that's like a local race, like a sheriff's race. I don't think that should be partisan, because I think in a lot of the, and especially local races, you're voting more for the person and their, what they're planning to do in your community versus what the party is planning to do.
Yeah, that's a new trend that I've seen in the past few years that I absolutely hate it. I I always appreciated that local elections were nonpartisan and it was strictly what does this person say? What does this person say? And that's all I care about. They're not beholden to anyone. Yeah, I'm not a fan of introducing partisanship into local politics at all, but where I live, it's definitely a reality.
Right. And I think it's a reality here too.
Yeah, and I think it's if it's not a reality everywhere else, it's probably going to slowly become that, unless of course Gen Z does something about it. They could be the heroes that we look to in this.
That's true. My son did think about, for a minute, he thought about registering independent, and then he realized he couldn't vote in primaries, and so he kept it with the party he originally registered for.
Yeah, I would recommend be a party in name only, and then
Yeah.
behave as yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, another big thing that is affecting, it's definitely affecting newsrooms has been inflation this year. And this is one of those that's been a slow burn. You didn't have like a giant banner headline the way you do with an election cycle, but I've seen newsrooms downsizing and cutting staff and other things, which is hugely detrimental. I've often said that the only source of accountability you have for local politics is your local journalists. So, are you seeing some of that over in West Kentucky the same way that we are over here?
I did see yesterday that Gannett, which is one of the nation's largest media employers, journalists were informed yesterday that there's going to be another round of layoffs. It's the third such move in about 6 months. Um, what I'm seeing on one website is saying that there was an email that went out. There was a target of a 6% reduction. Gannett has about 34,440 employees, which amounts to about 200 people. Think about spreading that through newsrooms. Just losing one or two can be detrimental on a very small staff if you have like 5 or 6 reporters.
Absolutely.
What I'm seeing here is it's getting hard for a lot of these smaller news organizations to find people to work in their newsrooms. Um, the newsrooms, they're just getting smaller and smaller. And like you mentioned, when we lose reporters, we lose a lot of the what's happening in here locally. You lose that accountability, you lose the watchdog, you lose the person who's going to city council and fiscal court and school board and reporting on those issues that are affecting you locally. And you're losing that advocate. I don't mean advocate in the way of, advocating for one way or another, but I mean the advocate for the citizen,
Yep.
as far as, keeping them informed on what's actually going on in the local schools, in the local courtrooms, in the local government, instead of having misinformation spread on social media, which we've seen a lot of misinformation in the past few years on social media.
Oh yeah.
And, it is, I mean, these newsrooms are doing the best that they can with the staff that they have, but it's not looking good at all. And,
Yeah, yeah, it's a
it's
troubling trend.
it's a difficult world out there right now for journalists. I still say local journalism is where it's going to thrive because people want to see what's happening in their communities.
Mhm.
I'm a big
I
advocate for community journalism. Always will, always have been, always will be. That's one of those hills I'm going to die on one day.
I'll be
But
there with you.
yeah, grandma and grandpa
Yeah.
always want to see what their kids are doing in school, and the local newspaper, they're going to cover things like high school band going to the state finals, or um, speech tournaments, or of course all the ball games. They're going to cover kids who win awards. They're going to cover all of these things that wouldn't matter in the national conversation, but in the local conversation, it's significant. You talk at the grocery store about what the local football team is doing, or how the band kids did at state, or whatever the case might be. you
Mhm.
know
My
Local is where it matters, and you're concerned about, like, are they going to raise my taxes, or what's going on in this school or that school.
Yeah, my last editor, when you talk about like what the band's doing, football team, he used to call that refrigerator journalism. The grandparents would always take it, cut that story out, get it on a magnet, and put it on the refrigerator. It's not as much of a thing now, but I distinctly remember, if you go to people's houses, you'd see just a dozen different newspaper clippings just up there on the refrigerator.
Yep, we still do that at our house.
And you're right, it's the local journalists that are going to do that. Even if we shift away from refrigerator journalism, so to speak, and I'm sure we will. Society always adapts and changes and evolves, but that aspect of just somebody covering those local events, both as a mediator for us, an advocate for the community at political events like city council meetings, courtroom proceedings, and so forth. That's vital, but also just keeping us informed about just what's going on in the community. It's like what kind of current events do people want to know about? Not just sports, although that tends to be the heart and soul of small towns, but also just whenever there's some kind of public event, like I know Mayfield has their gourd patch festival. That's kind semi pseudo big deal over there, I guess. But I'm sure Murray has some big events as well.
Right, and of course, always wanting to cover what's going on here at the university as well,
Mhm.
because it is one of the largest employers in town. But yeah, we definitely have our share of events and things that you only get in a small town, like Dairy Queen.
Yeah, exactly.
Dairy Queen closing is worth a good photo on the front page every year. Dairy
Oh,
Queen opening and closing.
oh, and did they? Oh, they're seasonal. Is that right? The
Yeah,
one
we're
there.
a seasonal one here.
I keep forgetting. For those who may not know, the Dairy Queen in Murray has no interior lobby, whatever you want to call it. It's all just picnic tables outside. So, yeah, it's open in the summer and closed in the winter. So, yeah,
Right,
that would
right.
be news.
That is news in a small town, but those
Mhm.
are the things, like, you only get in a small town.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Well, this is an interesting segue. You mentioned misinformation on social media. So one last thing, just for fun, I was debating whether to do this or a different one, but let's talk about Elon Musk and Twitter. This has been an entertaining dumpster fire. And speaking of time travel, who knows in between the time we record this and in the time this drops, if Twitter will even still be a thing. I think it will, but it's been an entertaining, uh, if grim spectacle.
Yes, yes. And like I was saying in the pre-show, first thing I did this morning was I went and hit my Twitter app to see is it still there?
Yeah, me
Because I
too.
see all these people posting, they were posting about, you know, if Twitter goes under, find me on, and like Discord is one of the ones they're talking about. Mastodon, I think, is it Mastodon? I may not be
Yes.
pronouncing it right.
No, you're right.
I haven't
Mastodon. Mhm.
I haven't tried that one yet. Find me on Instagram, find me on Facebook, find me on all these different platforms. I'm kind of like you. I don't think it's actually going to go away. I think he's having some challenges, obviously, with taking over the company. There have been people who have left. He's making them come back to the office, etc. Are they going to go away? I don't know. I think as journalists, we have to be conscious of this because we have started putting so much news and information over on our social media platforms. What happens if they do go away? How do
Mhm.
we reach our audience? Because a lot of our audience obviously is on social. But then that goes back to the local journalism. We still have community papers, we still have radio and TV. You know, we need to keep doing what we're doing on the local level and maybe not relying on social media as much. And I've always been a social media fan, but this has given me just a little bit of pause. But I do think Twitter will still be here in some form or fashion. But it is interesting. Every day I do hit the app and I'm like, is it going to be here today? Is it going to be gone? And for my personal, it's just something I go and scroll for headlines and scroll to see what's going on. I don't do a lot of posting on it.
I don't. Yeah, like we said, I don't think it'll go under. I doubt it. I mean, I've been surprised before, but even if it does, like you said, there were already so many other options, and there will be a half dozen other options that pop up between now and
Right.
next year, I'm sure. So like if Twitter goes away, then we'll just pay attention to what the next big one is, and that we'll start utilizing that, I'm sure.
Right. And I think we have to be careful of going on to the next shiny thing.
Hmm.
Because
Yeah,
remember
definitely.
Vine? Do you
Yeah,
remember we
it's
had
definitely.
Vine for a while, that like 6 seconds or however many, like a very short video platform, and then it went away and TikTok came.
Yeah.
And TikTok is where everybody is right now. Um, and TikTok is an interesting place.
Yes, I've been using TikTok. That's a good word for it. One of the things that infuriates me, and every platform does this, but I think with TikTok, it's a bit more flagrant because it's video. Um, the moment TikTok figured out what my political leanings were, and it figured it out pretty quickly because it's able to measure everything, like
Yeah.
where, who you visit, how long you view a video, like it's taking so much data and it immediately now I get nothing but specific political videos leaning in a very specific way, and it's infuriating to me mostly because that's not why I'm there. My
Right.
main reason my main reason for social media is to connect with people, mostly within creative writing like myself, and to watch funny videos about cats. It's really all
Right.
I want. When it comes to being informed, I will go to the direct source, the Courier Journal, the Associated Press. I don't want my news from social media, which is ironic, I say, as we're talking about using it.
Right. Right. Exactly. I'm the same way. I'd rather go read the news article on the site. Sometimes it's the Twitter link. It's the link on Twitter that gets me there because I see it.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, TikTok is an interesting place. I get a lot of University of Tennessee football, but that's because I'm a huge University of Tennessee football fan. So I'm not going to complain about that. That's made my TikTok life really interesting and fun this year.
There are fun things on there. I don't want to completely complain because a lot of times it's also recognized that I'm interested in comic books and things. So that'll pop up and I'll find some fun things there and some of the pop cultural stuff they do on there is that's fun. But when some very specific political rant, it's like even if it's something I lean toward, it still frustrates me because so many times it presents this as like, here's what's right, and anyone who suggests otherwise is either completely evil, completely foolish, completely blind. It's just like, no, that is not true, and we've got to stop. operating with that idea. That's what led us where we are. That's why January 6th happened.
Yes, yes, and that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, we're winding down, so we won't dive into that one. I guess one light one to touch on just before we go. This has also been a slow trickle as people returning back to work over this past year seems to. I'm sure it's been going on longer than that, but this seems to be where it's really started taking hold. Have you seen that? Have journalists been trickling back into the office, or are they still working remote?
I think it depends on where you are. Here around here, most of them stayed in the office. They didn't really ever go home, but a few people are still remote that I know in the field, but most of them are back in the newsroom.
Which, as long as it's healthy, I don't want to go against health standards. I'm glad to see that because I think that I like that newsroom where all the journalists, they connect. There's some collaboration there. Like, here's what's happening over here. Here's what's happening over here. And I think it's far more effective that way in person. Like I called them water cooler conversations in the office where everybody catches up on what's happening. So I'm glad to see
Right.
that.
Right.
Speaking as
It
somebody
is
who's
more local, probably more local than the larger cities and larger markets. But
mhm.
here in far Western Kentucky, like my husband, I think he was home for maybe like a week during the pandemic, and that was it. He
Sounds
just
about right.
preferred being in the office. It's great that now that we have the technology, so we can do like Zoom interviews for podcast, and we can do videos, and we can do all of this. But it is also great to be back in a newsroom where you do have that collaboration and just that camaraderie.
Mhm.
We journalists, we've got to stick together.
Yes. Oh, man, it's a dwindling field. Everybody's kinda and those of us who, even if we're not totally there like myself, still kinda speak up for them at least. Because yeah, they're a hard put upon group in my opinion.
Yes, they work very, very hard for long hours and very little pay, but it's such a needed service, and it's hoping that we are able to overcome the challenges of things like Gannett and the misinformation on social media, and that we will, come out stronger one day.
Yeah, I hope so. I remain cautiously optimistic that we will get there. That's not to say I don't have concerns. I've got a lot of concerns, but I am hopeful that this difficult transition, however long it is, will come out the other end stronger and better for it.
Yes, me
Yeah,
too.
yeah. Well, thank you again. We talked before that it's been quite a busy month for you. This is toward the end of semester. I can only imagine the caseload that's being piled upon your desk right now.
Exactly. We are in the countdown.
And thanks so much also for the work you do, bringing up future journalists, because like we said, we need them. And so we've got to train them. So we definitely need people like you. You are doing the Lord's work. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Always great to catch up with you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks again. Have a good Christmas and a good New Year.
All right. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you, Lee. I appreciate it once again. It's always cool to get together and look back on the year. So thanks for taking the time. I know that the end of the semester is a really hectic and busy time for you. So thanks so much. Everybody, if you're listening to this, make sure to also go check out 270 Stories. That's 270 Stories that Lee and her students put together. It's their own kind of small news publication, mostly digital and online, but go check that out. See the work that they're doing. You'll see the future journalists of the world. See what they're doing and the good things that Lee's doing over there, training up the next generation of journalists because you know what? I can't do this forever. In fact, I've technically already retired. But we need journalism. We need them more than ever with all that's happening. It's vital that journalism continues and thrives, and it's absolutely vital that it thrives at the local level. So, in addition to these up and coming journalists that Lee's training, be sure to also support any that you know. They don't get near the support and love that they need or deserve, so just let them know they're doing a good job, because these are not people living in ivory towers. These are your neighbors. They're just doing a job like you, and they decided to take a job where they can tell you what's going on. Looking ahead toward next year, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I think I mentioned this in the conversation with Lee. this election proved rather interesting. So many prognosticators, it became sexy to say everybody got it wrong. I don't know that it's quite that simple. There's always a lot of nuance with this thing, but I do think one comment that, and we did mention this, where Generation Z is here to stay. And I think the bottom line is upcoming politicians, if they cannot find a way to appeal to Generation Z, whatever their policies, whatever their beliefs, whatever uh, the future politicians want to accomplish in office, the demographic that they're going to have to appeal to now, it looks like it's going to be Generation Z. So what'll be interesting to see in the days ahead, you could call what happened a bit of a backlash against the Supreme Court decision earlier this year. What will be interesting to watch is, will that continue? Was it just a one-time thing? Because I've seen this happen before, where there is sort of a backlash against some sort of major policy or some sort of accomplishment on either the left or the right, whatever. And we have a whiplash back the other way a little bit, but then we sort of settle back into it. It'll be interesting to see if that's what happens here. Does Generation Z and everybody else, like, is it going to continue? Will that movement that they've possibly started, will it continue, or will it settle back? Again, we're not really going to know. I have my predictions and my thoughts based on what I've seen in the past, but sometimes history does doesn't always repeat itself, as this election proves. So anyway, it was an interesting year, and I think it's an interesting year in that it also promises more interesting years ahead. So uh, everybody, I hope you, as you are listening to this, I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving. I hope that you're getting ready for a fantastic holiday season. So in advance, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. Um, there were so happy Kwanzaa. I know there were so many other holidays this season that I'm missing, and I apologize for that. But I hope you have a very good holiday season and ultimately a very happy new year. In the meantime, keep reading and keep listening. Thanks.